I've been a JoJo fan for nearly close to a decade now, so I've heard a lot of fan theories, interpretations of characters, what should have or what could have been removed or improved upon, all of it. But there's one specific take in this franchise that I very much disagree with. That idea being Funny Valentine was never wrong, and or was the true hero of the Steel Ball Run race. Now, for any fan that reads above a 5th grade level, definitely knows for a fact, both of those statements are incredibly wrong. Obviously, Funny Valentine is the main antagonist of Steel Ball Run, a charismatic one at that. So charismatic, in fact, that he kind of transcends the fourth wall, convincing some JoJo fans that, well, going back to my previous statement, that he wasn't wrong. That his idea of using the holy corpse of Jesus Christ in order to benefit solely for the United States is totally justified by bringing it fortune and others pure calamity. So in this video, I want to completely deconstruct Funny Valentine, start to finish, in order to show you Araki's ultimate villain. And I mean that quite literally, somebody that surpasses Dio, Cars, Kira, Diavolo, and the previous ultimate villain in Araki's mind, Enrico Pucci. All in order to show you that the ultimate villain could never be right. So with that all being said, hello, my name is Metas. Walk with me. So before I break down Valentine, I do want to explain some things beforehand. This video is going to be inherently religious and political. It's something that you can't avoid with a character. Hell, I would even say if you're gonna make a Steel Ball Run video, or at least a good one at that, these are topics you can't avoid just because of what Steel Ball Run is. That being said, let's start off with who is Funny Valentine. Future President Funny Valentine would be born September 20th, 1847. Why this is significant is the fact that Funny Valentine was born during probably one of the most chaotic political periods within United States history, probably ever, starting with the Mexican-American War, and dies right before the era when America would become a global superpower. So throughout all of Funny Valentine's life, he saw a lot. And it would be like this right off the bat, as he would be born fatherless, as his father would die in the Mexican-American War. And years later, his friend, Captain Valentine, would bestow upon the child a handkerchief with his birth date on it and the tale of patriotism that came from his father. Now, briefly stopping here for anybody saying, oh, so this is how it starts with the idea of patriotism. Hold on. In the context, Captain Valentine actually tells a pretty good idea of what patriotism should be to Funny Valentine. So you can actually argue here, Funny Valentine's start for his love of America is actually fairly good and pure-hearted, at least in terms of being a child. Now, that rapidly changes as time moves forward. Those ideas of patriotism would be challenged and morphed by his surroundings. The biggest one being is, well, the American Civil War. Funny Valentine would fight for the side of the Union against the Confederacy of the South, and sometime during it would be captured and tortured so badly that he would end up gaining a scar resembling that of the United States flag. Now, aside from that, we don't really get any other details about this event. However, we can infer that if anything, Valentine's love for his country here is reinforced after the torturing, and sets up the building blocks for the modern version of the character that we see in Steel Ball Run. Now here comes the JoJo shenanigans. Sometime after his capture, Funny Valentine and his company would explore the San Diego desert in a army training exercise, but in doing so would have a chance encounter with the Devil's Palm. Valentine's entire company would die except for him, due in part to the fact that he found the heart of the Holy Corpse. Because of that, his stand D4C would also be granted to him, probably being the reason why he lives. So the Valentine we just talked about, being the younger version of him, probably actually died for the first time on that trip, but lived thanks to D4C's abilities most likely. And after returning from civilization, Valentine would figure out that the Holy Corpse has powers to it that he can use for the benefit of aiding the United States of America post-Civil War, by possibly using its ability to grant fortune for people and places, regardless to any consequences. Now here's where it gets weird. Up until this point on a surface level view, you can argue that Valentine's actions don't seem necessarily evil here. If anything, he seems like a pretty good patriotic American. But either through some deep-seated ideas that have finally manifested after years, or either through his presidential campaign, Valentine completely switches. Funny Valentine would put the lives of racers at risk in order to find the corpse parts all around the United States, while simultaneously hiring terrorists in order to kill racers who figured out that plan, and then doing some less than good stuff involving other characters that I'm not going to show on screen. Basically, what I'm trying to get at here is Funny Valentine during Steel Ball Run is not a good individual, and that's just on a surface level view at it, as later Steel Ball Run would eventually put Valentine's actions into question when comparing them to Johnny Joestar and Jesus Christ of Nazareth, ultimately asking the question, was it all for patriotism or some selfish idea for the United States of America? Now, wait, before you answer that question, we've only looked at Funny Valentine's character within the story. What does Araki have to say about Funny Valentine and interviews and the building of the character? Shockingly enough, there is a lot of info to work with here. I'd actually argue there is more to work with here than any previous JoJo villain, which is saying of something. In terms of physical appearance, the concept of a president fighting was inspired by the movie Independence Day, so his attitude, his look compared to his first appearance versus his last are all built around this idea. I would actually say it's probably the reason why he's so compelling for so many readers. A president who fights one-on-one against his enemies is much more compelling than a president that sits in a chair all day, something that's very appealing to the American people. However, aside from physical appearance, looking at his character profile sheet and what he symbolizes, thanks to Araki's comments in How to Create a Villain, Valentine clearly becomes somebody that is evil. His character profile sheet describes him something being like an emperor or something similar to King Louis XVI. Immediately, you can call Valentine anti-American, as the entire American system is supposed to be represented through people through a republic, not an emperor. And being described as similar to King Louis XVI isn't a good thing either. He lived through an absolute monarchy, which means he held supreme power over France and was not bound by any constitution. And while he was a fairly mediocre king, any good actions he did do amounted to nothing, as his life would be taken during the French Revolution. Ultimately meaning, politically speaking, Funny Valentine probably is a failure of a president. As shockingly, this is the only thing we really know about his global politics, or politics within the United States in general, as the story does not describe it at all. In reality, a lot of this actually does some retroactive foreshadowing, as a president holding a grand race like this can only really be described as king-like or emperor-like. And because of these apt descriptors, it kind of confirms the old ideas behind Funny Valentine being imperialistic, a little bit of a nationalist, and having a very warped idea of utilitarianism. And in specific to that, the sacrifice of the many will benefit the very few, with all of those ideas being wrapped in his version of patriotism. And when creating Valentine, Araki wanted to focus on a few establishing factors of his character that proved the former, that being a firm ideology founded in the idea of progressing civilization. Now, one could argue that is a noble goal. However, if you're a historian or somebody who likes to dabble in it, you should know the progression of civilization is not something that just happens because a few guys want some new things. It usually happens on the behestment on people that don't have much, their blood, sweat, and tears, sometimes even their lives. And Araki clarifies that Valentine knows this. He is completely aware of what is happening around him. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing during Part 7, and with that, the era of horses and anything previous to it will be gone very soon, and he recognizes democracy equates to acquiring economic rights in a capitalist system. So yes, capitalism is still a problem even within JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. This is why the napkin speech is so significant. In this new era, the United States of America needs to take the first napkin, as it will lead them to an era where they are the dominant superpower. And in order to do that, sacrifices need to be made, which leads us to the grand conflict that is Steel Ball Run, with Johnny and Gyro representing individualism versus Funny Valentine, who symbolizes the nation and its own selfish goals that will do anything in order to gain power. You could drive this point even further with past statements of how villains are supposed to be set up in previous parts, like how evil will do evil things and Araki has to show them to tell the audience that yeah, they're evil, kind of reverse of show not tell. Or in another case, that an evil entity will not question themselves if they are truly evil, looking at Poochie. And Valentine is pretty steadfast that his ideas and politics are the best for everybody in the United States, when in reality, they're not. It sacrifices thousands of people, maybe potentially millions or billions of people, thanks to D4C Love Train, that have no involvement with America. However, though, we do have a bit of a counterpoint. Remember, Funny Valentine's idea here came from a good-hearted place. It's just through time, it became corrupt and toxic. So Araki says his humanity is pretty questionable, but his strength lies in being a capable president, like I said previous. But in the first time I think ever discussing JoJo's on my YouTube channel, this is the first time I ever have to claim death of the author. And that is because of the existence of Jesus Christ, God, and the Bible all being real within Steel Ball Run, and in specific, the Steel Ball Run universe. So if you just didn't know, or just forgot to read some crucial parts in Steel Ball Run, Jesus Christ of Nazareth is a pretty central figure for the plot of Steel Ball Run and its entire continuity. And I literally mean him. It's just not his corpse we're trying to piece together. He actually physically or spiritually shows up to some of the characters in order to guide them within the story. And by far his biggest moment is Jesus telling Johnny not to shoot if his heart wavers, ultimately leading to a conclusion that Johnny, no matter what, has to get the corpse away from the people that would misuse it, or alternatively destroy it. Sadly, Johnny does fail in that encounter. However, the idea still moves on in the ending half of Steel Ball Run, where Johnny and Gyro are now on a dead set mission to get the corpse parts out of the hands of the president. So when you have the ultimate good, quoting from the Bible, on the side of the heroes, it makes everything opposing the heroes in a even worser light, putting into question any of their actions and morals. Specifically looking at Valentine even harder here, thanks to Araki's comment describing him as king-like, the Bible has plenty of stories in which a sinful king is challenged by a follower of the faith, with it ultimately ending in their demise because of their sin. Does this sound familiar to you? Even if you took the Bible out of the question here and just look at what both of these characters here in quotation marks do or symbolize, they are total polar opposites. Jesus symbolically tells Johnny to get rid of his corpse. It does not belong in anybody's hands. Johnny gets that clue and starts doing that, and never shows up in the story again like he did with Johnny, symbolizing the idea that Johnny got the clue. He understands that Johnny will do the right thing. And then when you proceed to look at the other side of the aisle, Valentine is in this state of denial. He has to constantly repeat to himself and to others that his plan is justified, that taking the first napkin now will lead to prosperity, even though it's stained with the blood of innocence, and then proceeds to double down, lie on his father's name in order to beat Johnny. Mind you, he did this whole thing in order to honor his father's patriotism, putting into further question, was any of this actually truthful? And bringing back the spiritual element, of course Jesus would be against his plan. Valentine's full plan is to rebalance the world's fortune in America's favor. However, since the universe operates by equaling that out, all the misfortune that the US could possibly endure will go to everybody else around the world and at any point in the future, killing a crazy number of people in the process. So of course the ultimate good guy, that being Jesus, would never want this, especially using his own body for these nefarious plans. Araki might say that Valentine's humanity is questionable, while in my opinion I think it's unquestionable. He is 100% a bona fide dickhead. He is evil, the most evil you could be. Hell, you might be able to put him in a specific category of evil because he is misusing the powers of Christ. You could say that Valentine, just like Poochie, is anti-Christ like. Which brings me to my next point, that being the comparison of Johnny Joestar and Funny Valentine. I haven't talked a lot about Johnny in this video, and that's for a specific reason. That reason being is that Johnny basically puts a super nail into this coffin. The story of Steel Ball Run is a religious one. Johnny loses everything and his legs in order to make him a better person over the course of the story, with Gyro being his aide, constantly questioning his actions to Gyro himself, other people, and even Jesus at one point, in order to go from selfish to selfless. As in the beginning of the story, Johnny would like to use the corpse in order to walk again. However, by the time of his death, would rather use the corpse in order to save people instead of using it to gain power, thanks to the events in Steel Ball Run. So when you directly compare that Johnny to Valentine, Valentine screws up constantly. He never questions himself or his own authority, and when it's clearly obvious he's in the wrong, he has this Freudian slip where he has to double down on his own ideas, reassuring to Johnny and everybody around him that his plan is just, when it isn't. He is willing to do anything and everything for this plan, ultimately showing that he is selfish, the total opposite of our hero. Johnny would rather live without Gyro in his life moving on forward than let Valentine's plan go through. If you can't see the symbolism in that, then I can totally understand why you thought Valentine was morally right. That politician speak got you doing circles, huh? So the question, was it all for patriotism or some selfish idea for the United States of America? I can ultimately say without a shadow of a doubt, it was just for selfish reasons for the United States. It was never for patriotism. Well, it possibly could have been at least the very beginning, but all the actions Valentine shows throughout the story and who opposes him basically show that it was never morally correct whatsoever. And even though it benefited America, it's only for the short term and hurts countless amounts of people. It was never right. President Funny Valentine was and will forever be wrong. So with that all being said, like, comment, share, subscribe, consider following me on Patreon if you like my content. Stay hydrated, and I will see you in the next one, ladies and gentlemen. Deuces.